for most people who are probably like, my hair is thinning, it is, changing in texture, or this just isn't normal, my hair is graying and I'm only in my 30s, like things like that, where it's like there's so many people, where the majority of people who are experiencing those issues, if you really take this to heart and put it into practice and stay consistent with it, where it's like, don't just do it for 30 days and be like, well, darn, it didn't work. It's like, stick with it, because your body, like, especially when it comes to minerals and things like that, where it's like, you really have to replenish your body, and once those stores gets built up, and once your body feels that stress lowering and it feels kind of things coming back into balance, it will then start prioritizing things like the health of your hair.
Hello and welcome to the Peace with Oracle podcast, Whitney. Thank you for joining me on today's episode. I'm really excited to have you on the podcast and to be speaking with you today about improving hair health through food and nutrition. So how to improve hair health is something so many of us wonder. Doing a simple Google search, you find queries for hair loss treatment, hair loss prevention, hair loss cure. We all want the answers to our hair problems, because hair issues can be, they can come in many forms, whether it's hair loss, hair thinning, dry, brittle hair, oily, greasy hair, and even gray hair, which a lot of people might just think is like down to age, but there is actual reasons behind it. So in this episode, we're obviously going to be covering causes for hair loss, all these areas that I just touched on, and then nutrition tips to help nourish the hair, which is all super exciting. I'm super interested to obviously learn about. I'm sure I'm going to learn so much, and our listeners will learn a lot of valuable tips that they can start implementing from like now to start taking care of their hair. So before we get into all that good stuff, can you first share a bit about yourself, how you started Restored Nutrition, your website, and working with clients?
For sure, yeah. I'm super excited to talk to you as well, so I'm looking forward to today. But yeah, so I am a functional nutritional therapy practitioner, and I got started in that kind of through my own health issues. I think through the kind of first portion of my life, I kind of just had a lot of gut issues, just a lot of health issues, and I really didn't think much of them. Like, I kind of just thought it was normal, things like that. But I kind of got to this breaking point where more and more issues started coming out, and I just was like, this is not normal. Like, I'm in my mid-20s and I feel awful. And like, this isn't normal, and I wasn't necessarily finding any answers through kind of conventional medicine, because on kind of a lot of normal tests, I was really totally fine. They weren't able to necessarily diagnose me with anything, which was good, but at the same time I was like, okay, but I still don't feel great. And so that's really what kind of pushed me into just diving deeper into my own health, and really finding that, if I want to kind of figure this out, like, I kind of have that personality where it's like, I want to be able to fix me. I want to be able to fix me so that I can then help other people. And so that's really what pushed me into, becoming a nutritional therapy practitioner, and starting kind of my own business to help women kind of just navigate a lot of those health issues, where it's just like, you're not finding the answers that you need, but there's something off. And so that's kind of, through that, I just started learning as much as I possibly could, testing out things on myself and all of that good stuff. And that's kind of really what started my journey into Restored Nutrition and creating that business, in working with other women to help them just navigate that world as well. Because it can be pretty, confusing. There's so much information out there, and while there's a lot of good information, like, everyone is really individual. So that's where it's like, Yes, there is misinformation out there, but there is a lot of good information, but it may not apply to everyone the exact same way. So kind of just helping people, navigate that world is something that I've found a lot of joy in and just interest in. I like that, just being able to research, and every case is a different puzzle to put together and all of that good stuff. So that's kind of how I got started in that. And I've really only been working with clients for about the last 2 years, I think it is. So I am fairly new in my practice, but it's something that I feel like I've been doing a lot longer because my health journey has been a lot longer than 2 years. So I've definitely put a lot more research in it than just the previous 2 years. So
That all sounds super, super cool. I think, like what you said, how there is a lot of good information out there, but obviously we're all unique, we're all different. Sometimes you have to like work with someone who can see you on a personal level and understand like what's going on currently in your own kind of health to see if this piece of information is valuable for you. Because like you said, like there is so much information and sometimes like information overload and you just think like, I don't know where to start.
Exactly. Yes, that is so true.
What kind of test do you think people should be doing if, like, for example, if they're struggling with like hair loss or like some kind of hair issues, like what do they need to go and look at?
Yeah. So, it does kind of depend. There are like, if you kind of want to start with that, medical route where you're looking at some various tests, a good place to look is always just getting a full thyroid panel, because that is definitely something that is very related to hair loss. But there is a lot more to it, where sometimes, a lot of, if you're dealing kind of with hair loss issues, it might not show up on really a conventional test. Sometimes it's just kind of looking at some of just the foundations of health, like what are you eating, how much are you eating, what kind of nutrients are you getting in your diet, or is there a big lack of nutrients or things like that. So yes, there are kind of conventional tests where it's like that thyroid test being a really good one to start with, to make sure that it's like, if you just to make sure, do you have a thyroid issue or not. I think there are benefits to doing various kind of hormone testing as well, but a lot of times that's not necessarily where I start. If you are experiencing kind of changes in your hair, whether that's hair loss, or just thinning hair, brittle hair, just that texture change, or even kind of, changing in the color of your hair even, it's rooted in a form of kind of energy deficiency, and so sometimes that's honestly where I like to start, where it's like, yep, there's a lot of different tests we could do. And even with some people, I do like to do, hair mineral analysis testing, which can be really beneficial. But sometimes just starting with like the basics of, let's look at your diet, let's look at how well your foundations are functioning, and see, when we target a lot of those areas, what happens to your hair when we go after those root issues. So I don't normally kind of, go after a lot of testing in the beginning, because I think there's just so much that we can do when we evaluate like the foundations of nutrition, and just the foundations of health, from digestion and blood sugar, mineral balance, things like that, that really play a big role in the health and quality of your hair. So that's really where I like to start with people first, before really going and getting a lot of tests done. I think it's just so easy to really first evaluate those foundations and focus on those. And then down the road, if you've done that, if you've kind of put in the hard work, worked on balancing those foundations, and you're still having those issues, then adding in some additional testing could be beneficial.
Yeah, totally. I definitely agree. I think it's always good to, before you like do all those like tests, I feel like a lot of people just don't have the foundations down yet.
Yeah.
Like you touched on, like the gut, the thyroid, the blood sugar balance, all these kind of areas can support all these issues. And then like if you're still suffering from like these kind of issues, and you can maybe delve a little bit deeper and do like those those tests like head tissue mineral analysis tests, all that kind
Yes.
of stuff. But yeah, I think it's so basically touched like on those the foundations and like kind of touched on like causes of like stress being a big part and nutrient deficiencies, not eating enough. What are there any other kind of causes, or I guess like within like the stress aspect, like
Yes.
what comes in, what would you say comes within stress, if that makes sense?
Yes. So I love talking about stress because a lot of times we think like, okay, I have a stressful job, or I, have just some stressful life things where it's like, yes, those are all stressors, but those are just like one tiny aspect of stress, where it's like there's environmental stress. There can be stress like not getting enough sleep or not getting enough quality sleep, not enough sunlight, things like that are kind of those external sources of stress that we think of. And then also, but internal stressors are so important as well. And so these are a lot of times like the stress that maybe we don't know a lot about, or we don't even know are really going on. So yes, things like under eating, or not necessarily getting a nutrient dense diet, so you're kind of deficient in some specific nutrients. Yes, those are a stressor. But also things like having kind of blood sugar regulation issues is definitely a stressor. And sometimes I think we think, or at least like before I really learned about blood sugar, I didn't even realize, I thought like, oh, if you have kind of like a diagnose like type 1 or type 2 diabetes, you have blood sugar issues. If you don't have that, you don't have blood sugar issues, but so many of us have blood sugar issues because we feel like that 2 p.m. slump, when we just hit a wall, or we have those sugar cravings, or we get hangry, like things like that, where it's like that is a sign that your blood sugar is not doing awesome, so that is a big stressor on your body. And I even think it is kind of popular right now to do a lot of kind of maybe intermittent fasting or things like that. And it's like, if you're not careful with that, like that is a massive stressor, And so it's like, that's not the best thing to do for a lot of people. Not only can that, cause you to restrict calories or nutrients, but it's kind of forcing your body to do something that's not natural. And so it's forcing it to rely on your stress hormone cortisol. And that's where it's like, when you are living and kind of running on that stress hormone, that's when it starts to contribute to things like hormonal imbalances. So it's going to kind of push your progesterone production down and can cause estrogen to get out of balance. So whether that's, you can have too much estrogen, or you could just have a normal amount and not enough of progesterone. So there's that imbalance in those, hormones, where it's like, that is a big stressor on your body. And that kind of can stimulate this chain reaction of events that can lead to things like hair loss and hair thinning and all of those things. So hormones are a really key aspect of it as well. So that can, that in and of itself can be a stressor, but a lot of times that hormone balance comes from living on a lifestyle of kind of stress, running off stress, essentially. And so, yeah, those are, outside of kind of nutrient deficiencies and things like that, stress and kind of that hormone balance, blood sugar issues, things like that are some of those key aspects, that I really see leading to kind of some of those stressors. And then also, I think too, the other thing that I see often is a lot of people will say, okay, I'm eating really clean, but I'm still having a lot of these kind of health issues or things that I just don't understand. And when you look at kind of their diet, it's like, yes, okay, you're avoiding like the things you know are not good for you. But, the foods that you're eating aren't necessarily that nutrient dense. There's not a lot to them. And so, yes, you're eating clean, you're eating kind of healthy foods, but they're not giving you near enough like vitamins and minerals that you need. And, your body really kind of views hair as like a nice to have, not necessarily like a need to have type of thing. And so if it doesn't have enough, vitamins and minerals to keep your vitals kind of running and functioning, it's not really going to prioritize like the health of your hair. It's like, we don't really need that right now. We need to make sure that, our heart keeps beating and we're breathing and we're doing all of these things that are keeping you alive and functioning. But you don't really need your hair right now. So, it's like, it kind of leads into that where it's like, if you don't have enough, your body's not going to prioritize things like your hair. So,
yeah, exactly. Like all of the stuff you said is just like, people aren't aware of this stuff, obviously, that stress can be a huge driver, but it's just not stress of like, yeah, I got an exam and like I'm super stressed.
yep.
I've got like a deadline. It's just like the stress of like even which can inhibit thyroid production, which then obviously affects your progesterone. And then estrogen is super high, and it's like everyone thinks estrogen is like the good hormone, like the female hormone that's like super good, but it's just like that's like a stress kind of hormone which like triggers shock in the body. So like all this stuff I'm not really aware of. So like just obviously maintaining blood sugar balance through ensuring you eat regularly throughout the day and eating enough, and then all this stuff's like super important. I guess we've touched on some of those like causes, the reasons. I guess like, do you want to like maybe delve into hair loss and then like maybe more specifically the reasons why you might why hair might go gray or like this changing color? Like, do you want to go in that avenue, or should we?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can kind of talk about both of those, and those will like kind of lead into each other, So looking at kind of when hair loses its pigment, and goes gray, things like that, especially when you're looking at kind of that premature graying hair, it's a little bit of a sign of kind of oxidative stress, or again, that stress in the body. Your body is kind of losing specifically like with hair pigmentation, it really comes down to minerals, where it's like, that's where I see the biggest thing, where it's like when it's hair texture thinning loss, it's both definitely like minerals play a big role in that, as well as kind of the macronutrients that you're getting is important. But when it comes down to like that hair pigmentation aspect, a lot of times it is very much related to mineral regulation. And minerals are definitely super complex, where it's like they all have like these antagonistic and synergistic roles in the body. And so it's not necessarily like, make sure you take this one mineral and it's going to fix your graying problems. It really is kind of like, what is the ratio? What is the function going on between these minerals? And specifically with kind of that graying hair, I know there's kind of a lot of research and kind of, just talk of like the whole kind of copper and iron relationship can really impact the pigmentation of whether it's your hair, or a lot of times, it can even show up on your skin, pigmentation. And like, as you kind of age, you get, like age spots, it's really similar to where it's like, as you age, it's kind of a normal thing that your hair will lose its pigmentation and start to gray. We've kind of, normalized that. But it does come down to, what is that relationship between copper and iron, and how is that, kind of producing the pigmentation that's going on in your hair? And so a lot of times, specifically when kind of copper gets a little bit bound up, whether like you can't use it, you can't access it, or you're not getting enough of it, it really can cause that loss in pigmentation in your hair, as sometimes kind of iron gets more built up in the tissues. So like that is definitely an aspect that is involved in kind of hair pigmentation loss, essentially. And that can definitely, again, like that plays into the types of food you're eating, and what, are you relying on whole foods? Are you relying on processed foods? Or even, are you just eating nutrient dense foods or not, So that kind of definitely can contribute to that pigmentation loss. And so especially when you start to see that early, it can definitely be a sign that, definitely some kind of mineral imbalances that are going on that are contributing to that change in kind of pigmentation for sure.
So do you think it's worth people doing one of those hair tissue mineral analysis tests, or do you think people are just, because I feel like it's common for us to have iron overload, so I feel like either way, this copper to iron ratio is something everyone should just be like working on no matter what.
For sure. Yes. Yeah. So I think there's a lot of foundational things that people can start with, that promotes overall mineral balance. But there is benefit to getting hair tissue mineral analysis tests. I kind of like to suggest, where it's like start by working on those foundational things, like get a lot of the, foundational things in place. So like there's things where it's like if you're not eating, organ meats or incorporating those in, that's a super easy thing to start doing. Where it's like regardless of if you get a hair tissue mineral analysis test or not, I would probably suggest you eating organ meats either way. It's going to be a part of kind of what we do probably in both scenarios. So I think that it's like, yes, there is some really foundational things where it's like getting some good traditional foods in your diet that are really mineral dense. Are things that most everyone can start doing now, and that will automatically help support kind of that mineral balance. But then once you kind of have that in a good place, adding in a hair tissue mineral analysis test can definitely be something that is helpful, because it gives a lot of insight into what is going on in your specific body. And like I kind of mentioned before, all minerals have this really, they have this antagonistic and synergistic relationship with each other. So, going in where it's like some people adding in like a potassium supplement can be super, super helpful, but not everyone needs that. And that's one where it's like, if you need it, you want it. If you don't need it, you don't want to add it in, type of thing. So I think when it comes to a point where getting a hair tissue mineral test can definitely be really helpful for some people. If you're kind of working on those foundations, you're consistent with that, you're seeing improvement in other areas, but maybe things like, you're still seeing signs of just hair thinning, hair loss, or pigmentation changes in your hair. Adding in that the HTMA test can definitely be really helpful, because it just gives you insight into what does your body specifically need, and how can we target that support specifically to you to get you closer to a place of balance. So I think that for some people it is definitely helpful and great to add in, because it can provide a lot of information that you might not necessarily suspect or know to target without kind of what that test reflects.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like testing is something I feel that it's important, and especially if you have the money to do the kind of test. But also, I feel like so many people suffer from like hair loss or any kind of issue, and they just take every kind of supplement. They just go to the store and it's like, yeah, I need vitamin A, I need whatever, vitamin D. And it's just like you said, all these kind of vitamins, minerals, they like work together in the body. They're not, these supplements aren't always like natural, and they can just be like toxic in the body. Like taking too much vitamin A or one that's not really natural is going to be toxic to the body. So it's just like either way, you're better off just working hard to get it through food. Which like I always say, like you're better off eating the food rather than the supplement. But I always get people saying, obviously with the food nowadays, the soil is like depleted for minerals. It's just like, I have to get my supplements. It's just like, I get it, but like we have to like focus more on the diet aspect, and obviously do our research to see what supplements are more natural, like what kind of company has created more healthy supplement options, because there's like so many that aren't natural.
Yeah, I know the whole supplement industry, like I feel like I am super picky with the supplements that I recommend, where a lot of times, a lot of people ask me like, what do you think of this supplement? What do you think of this supplement? And I'm like, I'm very limited on the supplements that I like. And like, yes, there's probably fine supplements out there, but if it's a synthetic supplement, it's automatically kind of in like a B level category for me, where I'm like, I have a list of A level category ones that I would take first before taking those, you know? And so it is like, oh, yeah, the supplement industry can be so confusing. And yes, there are benefits to some of them, but it's like if you're not getting it from your diet, the supplement, you know, it's like the supplement is a fraction of what you could get from that whole food. So
Yeah.
I agree with you.
So with talking about stress, obviously minerals are really important. So like I guess what minerals get depleted when we're stressed? So and then like what would be like your top minerals that we need to obviously add back in?
Yes. Okay. So when we're stressed, for sure, like, so magnesium is the biggest one that everyone talks about. When you're stressed, your body does burn through magnesium quickly. So, yes, magnesium is definitely like the first one that comes to mind where it is really, really important. That is the one where it's like, it is, you know, it's virtually not in our soils really that much anymore, where it's like that really did used to be the main source of magnesium, where it was from good quality soil growing good quality crops, and then we would eat those. But it really is very, very depleted in soil right now. So a lot of people are kind of starting out in a little bit of a deficient place. And then under stress, that is a primary one that your body burns through quickly. So magnesium is definitely a really important one. Also, so under stress, our adrenals really use sodium. And so I know sodium is kind of one of those things where it's like, oh, wait, like shouldn't I be eating like low sodium foods? And it's like, you don't necessarily want the sodium that's in like a lot of processed foods. So, you know, those low sodium foods, you know, that's not the sodium we want to be eating. But if we're talking about like a good quality kind of like sea salt, you know, or just a good quality source of sodium, that is actually like the primary mineral that your adrenals really love. That's why sometimes like some people will really crave salt when they are stressed or when they're really tired or fatigued. Like they'll just crave like salty foods. And that's usually a sign that it's like your adrenals are kind of telling you like, hey, I'm working a lot. I need some sodium to work and function. So that's another one where it's like adding in sea salt to your diet, whether that's, you know, putting it on your food or adding it to water or drinks or things like that, is actually a great way to kind of support your body under stress. And so a lot of times, you know, I'll kind of tell people where it's like, yeah, if you're feeling more stressed, add more salt to your diet, you know, it will really help support your adrenals. So those are definitely two big players in kind of when your body is stressed, those definitely get depleted. And then potassium is something that is really important as well. I know we don't necessarily hear like a ton about potassium in stress, but potassium is really, really important in kind of thyroid health and thyroid function, and also the health of your cells. Kind of what is moving in and out of your cells is really determined by both sodium and potassium and their relationship. And so a lot of times I see people, you know, losing potassium or just coming back very low in potassium when we do an HTMA test. And that's something that it's like you kind of need that for your cells to be healthy, for your thyroid hormone to be getting in and out of your cells and giving you energy. That's a key, you know, it's like that's a key aspect of energy production and helping you feel good and helping you, you know, kind of going back to that whole hair loss is this kind of deficiency in energy. You need that energy production. So potassium does play a role in that as well. And that's something where it's usually your body does start to lose potassium kind of first. Before it starts to lose some of those other minerals, you'll usually start to see kind of a loss in potassium first. So those are definitely, when it comes to kind of when your body is under stress, those are definitely kind of like some of the key minerals that I will usually think of is that's the best place to start. There's definitely other minerals that, you know, as you start to kind of use up magnesium, sodium, potassium more. Back to that relationship of all minerals, like, yes, those are going to influence other minerals, but kind of as a where to start place, magnesium, sodium, and potassium rich foods are so important in kind of supporting your body under stress and really just setting that foundation of building up that mineral balance. Those are kind of some of your main minerals, where it's like, just like we have macro nutrients, you have macro minerals and micro minerals. And sodium, potassium, and magnesium are some of those macro minerals that you can't balance the micro minerals until you've balanced the macro minerals. And so it's a great place to start in targeting kind of those main minerals. And it's also it's really a simple place to start because you can do a lot of that through good food sources, like a good source of sea salt, or, potassium coming from things like fruit, or even starchy root vegetables, or coconut water, things like that. You can get a good amount of potassium and sodium through food easily. And then, magnesium is one of those where, like I kind of said, you can get it through some food. And I always recommend, like, get these food sources, like my favorite are usually like cacao or kind of cooked greens, things like that, for magnesium. But adding in kind of things like Epsom salt baths or a magnesium spray, things like that. And then in some cases, like if you are comfortable, looking at a good quality magnesium supplement can be beneficial, especially during times of stress.
Mm. That was all super like valuable, and I feel like I like the way like you said like those three minerals, like the macro kind of minerals, because I feel like it helps people become less overwhelmed of like, because there's so many minerals out there, so I feel like just focusing on these before you end up looking at the other kind of stuff, and like just focusing on addressing and like filling up on these kind of minerals really helps you like just focus and feel less stressed.
Yeah. Yeah, it kind of just takes it down, and it's like, focus on step one. Yes, there's a lot of other areas to focus on, but this is like step one, where it's like, if you do this, it's really going to influence a lot, and it'll probably mean you have less to do in step two, when you get that step one correct.
Yeah, exactly. So what other kind of nutrient tips are there apart from like looking at the minerals? Are there any other suggestions, recommendations?
For sure. Yeah. So I do always, I think you can kind of look at going through protein, fat, and carbs, and they do play a role kind of in your hair, and looking really at the types of kind of fat, protein, carbs that you're consuming is really, really impactful. So a lot of kind of starting with kind of that protein, like, yes, getting enough protein in your diet is really, really important for hair health. But also looking at, the type of protein that you are getting can make a really big difference. And so a lot of times we can kind of, sometimes we prioritize things like those muscle meats that we think of, like, beef, chicken, things like that. And yes, like that is a good source of protein, but we really do want to balance it out with those sources of kind of things like bone broth, or more kind of like bone in meats. Like when you cook the meat on the bone, a lot of collagen from the bone can cook into the meat. So that really helps balance out kind of the amino acids in that, which can help reduce inflammation. Things like, collagen and gelatin-rich foods, fish, eggs, all those types of things. We want to make sure like we are getting those foods in our diet as well. And organ meats is kind of in that category too, where it's like that kind of is like definitely like a mineral supplement too, but it's also a really good source of protein, and it's a really good source of fat, which I'll mention in a minute. But that balance can be really, really important. So, it's like, I know like several years ago, I used to, kind of before I really knew a lot about nutrition or things like that, I really prioritized, I pretty much only ate like muscle meats. That was the only type of protein that I really got. And my hair was falling out like crazy. And I know that I was eating enough protein because I was tracking it. And so it was like, I was definitely eating enough protein, but I wasn't necessarily getting that balance where it's like I was not getting those more kind of rich sources of protein, where it's, that bone broth, the kind of the gelatin that comes in that, the collagen, all of that is really, really important, because it goes into kind of this idea of amino acid balance, where the different amino acids really can influence our health. And so just making sure you're getting in that good balance can be really helpful. So variety is definitely really helpful in that regards. And then looking at fats, yes, fats can be really, really helpful. The main thing that I see with fats is making sure that you're getting in a really good source of fat. So saturated fats are going to be very, very supportive for the body, where it's like a lot of those like processed oils that are in things like restaurant foods and processed foods and things like that, are those actually can contribute to inflammation in the body, which contributes to stress, which contributes to hair loss and all of that kind of stuff. So really just stepping back and looking at, what is the quality of fats in my diet? Where are they mainly coming from? Are they coming from processed sources? Am I eating out a ton? Or are they coming from whole food sources that have been around for a long time? So I think that is definitely a key aspect in reducing inflammation, is that balance of the fats you're taking in can really be impactful in just your overall health, but also the health of your hair. And then lastly, so yes, looking at carbs, like carbs are definitely a great energy source. That's kind of what they give us. They also give us a lot of those minerals. So like potassium is found in a lot of carbohydrate rich foods. They're found in fruits, they're found in potatoes, things like that. That's where you get a lot of potassium from. So there are like really good mineral sources in carbohydrates, but they are what also kind of provide that really good energy source that our body needs to kind of adapt, kind of be resilient to stress and to have enough energy to go into healthy hair. Like we talked about in the beginning, where it's like, if you don't have enough energy, your body's not going to prioritize hair health. So we want to make sure your body is getting enough energy. And so just having kind of that balance, where it's like we really do, there's a role and a purpose for each of the macronutrients, and there's kind of a balance within each macronutrient that can be really, really helpful in just supporting your overall health, but also really supporting the health of your hair.
Exactly. And like touching on the whole point about the amino acids, obviously focusing on like muscle meats, like we know they have like the more inflammatory kind of amino acids, like your tryptophan and all that kind of stuff. So it's like obviously focusing on more gelatin and bone broth collagen has more anti-inflammatory to help. Yeah, so that's why sometimes if you do have muscle meats, it's good to have some gelatin to help balance it out.
Yes, definitely.
Everyone thinks like no one is aware of like how we have like these different kind of amino acid profiles, and tryptophan, it's like a precursor of serotonin. Everyone thinks serotonin is like this like amazing hormone, like the happy hormone or whatever. It's just like it's just not known. And like when you realize how serotonin can lead to more cortisol and like work on all that stuff, it's just like sometimes you end up in this like other rabbit hole of like realizing how everything you thought was helpful, like avoiding salt and like cutting carbs and eating vegetable oils and like serotonin is so good for you. It's just like you realize, I have to like literally go back to like what people were doing like hundreds of years ago. So it's like it's quite just it's a bit mind-boggling sometimes how like our like whole approach of like nutrition has like just completely changed. And like a lot of people have been like experiencing all this kind of like issues with their health and hair loss since we have changed how we've been eating. Because obviously people who follow like a low carb diet can end up experiencing hair loss, and you like wonder like what is going on. Like I'm avoiding carbs to help balance my blood sugar, or lose weight, and it's just like you end up with other issues because of the whole starts supporting your thyroid. You're not getting the energy you need. Like one thing, and then like you experience other kind of like issues.
Yes, I know. It really is crazy when you see kind of like how we started obviously hundreds of years ago. There wasn't a lot of influence. They ate what they had. And now where it's like we've had all of this influence in kind of that diet industry, we have gotten so far from what the human body actually like thrives on. You do kind of step back and wonder, well, like, how did that happen? How did we get so far away? How have we gotten so confused in what we feel like is healthy and what we've been taught is healthy, and it to me, like, that is something that it's like that makes me so sad, where it's like it's been, it's been an outside influencer who had a plan and a purpose to, whether it was make money, make profit, or, whatever you want to think the goal was. There was an outside, kind of goal that they were trying to reach that wasn't exactly like the health of individuals. There was always an outside perspective. And so it is just like, oh, it's so frustrating when you see like how far we've come. And it's like, oh, just, they had it right back then. Like, they didn't even know it, but they had it right.
They had so many things right, but like obviously, like you said, like whoever like made all these kind of differences and like starts creating all these polyunsaturated like fats like vegetable oils, sunflower, whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the more people get sick, the more you have to pay like hospitals and like private people to like get better. So it's like a never ending, like, here's my money, make me better. And then like,
Yes, it's a vicious cycle. It really is.
So touching on some of these, like the macronutrients, is there a ratio you would recommend? So like, because obviously I feel like people focus so much on protein, and then like they now feel like people are trying to have more like fat, like with the keto diet, there's like a lot of fat, obviously, because it's like less carbs. But like now getting into like a mindset of like nourishing the body, like is there a good ratio, or like would you say it's just personalized, or is it like a starting point that people can start working towards?
Yeah, so I always kind of like to, I think there is a good starting point where it's like there's kind of some minimums where it's like ideally you want to get to at least, this much of this nutrient type of thing. And then from there, I really kind of, I like to keep, when you're kind of looking at like general like macronutrient balance, I really like to kind of keep things fairly balanced. And then from there, it's kind of all like feeling out, do you feel better on, if you kind of increase your carbs a little bit, do you feel better? Do you have, more energy, or do you not, do you not feel better? I think different people can thrive on kind of different ratios, but I think looking at some certain minimums, like specifically kind of starting with protein, I do usually like to get people to kind of at least having a minimum kind of starting, if you're not eating like 80 grams of kind of protein per day, starting there. And then like, if you can kind of bump it up to at least 100 grams, do that for a while. And then for some people, that's going to be a great amount. Some people may need more. Some people, depending on kind of your activity level, that really impacts, your protein intake and what you're really going to thrive on. But I think that's a really great starting point in kind of the realm of protein, where a lot of people, when they initially kind of, when I kind of initially start working with some clients, they're maybe eating 40 to 60 grams of protein. And they're like, I had no idea. Like, I felt like I was getting, it's like I had protein a couple times a day. Like, I felt like I was eating enough. And when you really look at it, it's like you're eating about half of what your body needs. And that's usually because people are eating mainly like those muscle meats. And so I'm usually like, stay where you are with the muscle meats, and let's add in things like bone broth. Let's add in collagen. Let's add in, like if you can have dairy, let's add in dairy. Those are like the great kind of protein boosters that really get you to that place of being able to eat 80 to 100 grams very naturally, where I think sometimes people feel like I'm just eating protein all the time, but once you kind of start doing it and getting to that place and eating balanced, where it's like you're not just eating 100 grams of muscle meats, you're eating a combination of many different types, it actually does not feel like that much. You'll find that you hit that amount very easily. And so that's like a great goal to work for. Like if you're not eating kind of 100 or 80 grams of protein, like try and get there. If you're maybe eating about 80 grams, like I would say bump it up even to 100 grams and see how you do with that amount. Like that's going to be a great place to be, or at least start at for most people. And then from there, you can get a little bit more targeted and all that kind of stuff. For carbohydrates, I do think this one can vary for different people. I usually will say, I think going kind of below, depending on kind of how many calories you're eating, this will obviously change. But for most women, I really like to see most women eating like at least kind of 150 grams of carbs. And then from there, a lot of people do better with more than that. Some people do good with kind of a range between 150 and 200 grams. Some people do better with more than that. That's kind of where it's like, we kind of have to, you kind of have to sometimes work up to that, where yes, there are going to be people who thrive on 200 grams or more of carbs, obviously depending on how many calories you're eating. But coming from kind of this place of very low carb eating, I find most people are not even really eating 150 grams or 175 grams. So I'm always like, let's just start there, where it's like, if you're not eating that much yet, let's get you up to that place. See what your energy becomes like, see how you feel. And then from there, we can kind of play around with finding that range that is actually going to be really beneficial to you, because you may need more than that. But it's a great place. If you're not eating that amount, at least just start there. And then really, I use fat to kind of just fill in the rest, where with that, I find kind of just a range where it's like, we don't want to be eating too low, not enough fat. We do want to make sure we're getting enough fat. But most people, especially right now, I find are actually eating a lot more fat, where it kind of crowds out the protein, it crowds out the carbs. So sometimes we kind of work on, scaling that back a little bit, where it's like, okay, let's just find ways where, again, when you kind of start naturally boosting some of your sources of protein coming from gelatin, bone broth, collagen, things like that, things naturally balance out. So a lot of times it's not necessarily people are eating too much fat, it's that they're honestly not eating enough protein and carbs. So they're not eating enough overall calories. And so I really focus on like, let's make sure we're increasing, kind of boosting that protein and the carbohydrates. Normally, most people's fat stays where it is, but when you kind of look at the ratio where they are at, it's like fat is a little bit high, but it's normally because you're not eating enough protein or carbs. So start with making sure you're kind of eating enough protein and carbs, and see how your body feels when you get to kind of those minimum amounts, and then continue to kind of, if you need to build it up more, if you need, if you're not eating enough calories at those minimum amounts, we need to kind of continue to build that up more. But it's kind of that process where a lot of people do before they can jump into eating that many carbs or eating that much protein or balancing their fat. You kind of have to do everything in a little bit of a slow process, where it's like, we're going to work up your calories. We're going to work up kind of, the grams of protein or the grams of carbs that you're eating, and kind of start there to find the balance of macronutrients that's really going to be beneficial for you. So I don't get too deep into like really tracking or, specific amounts. I kind of start with those minimums, and then I really just have people kind of feel it out, where it's like, what are you experiencing? What are your symptoms? What's your energy levels? How's your sleep? All those types of things I think can really give you a lot of feedback on, are you eating a balanced diet for you?
Yeah, definitely. So this might be a question people might wonder now, is how often should they be eating muscle meats in a week?
in a week?
Yeah, we'll say in a week, yeah.
Yeah. So this is I feel like this is a little bit of a tough question, because I know that it's like different people definitely have different opinions on this. And like, I think that, as far as kind of how I recommend things to my clients, like I'll say that it's like, that's something like, if you want to have muscle meats, once or twice a day. I think that's totally fine. What I try and prioritize is like make sure that, I like to have people get a balanced amount. So it's like, pick a recipe when you're kind of planning out the recipes you're going to make for the week, get something that has, beef, get something that uses, usually with chicken, I really like to have people just roast a whole chicken instead of just doing like a chicken breast or something like that, where it's like, roast a whole chicken, so you're getting the bones, you're cooking it on the bone, all that good stuff. You're getting a lot of good nutrients from that. Make sure you're getting in fish, and then fill in the rest with kind of bone broth and dairy and things like that. Because a lot of times people are kind of coming from a place where they might not be able to digest dairy well. And so that's kind of a whole like group of really good protein that they can't have. And so it's really, I kind of just try and look at like within a day, really try and balance out what you're consuming. So you will probably have, one or two meals that might have muscle meats. The other meals and snacks that you eat in that day, try and get it from other sources. So whether that's bone broth or collagen or gelatin, or if you can have dairy, fill in the rest of your meals throughout the day with those sources, instead of kind of having like, muscle meat 3 times a day and maybe a snack that involves muscle meat, where it's just like that's the main thing. Kind of finding that balance where it's kind of like a 50-50, where it's like you are having beef and chicken maybe a couple times throughout the week, but then you're also having fish, you're also having dairy, you're also having eggs, collagen, bone broth, all that type of thing. So again, like I know sometimes that can feel really overwhelming for people where it's like we've kind of, I don't know, eating muscle meat in this day and age is very normal. Well, that's kind of like the main thing that we think of. Most meals are built around that. So sometimes it can be a little bit confusing of like, how do I go from that to like only eating muscle meats like a couple times a week? It can kind of feel a little bit confusing, like, but I have to reach my protein goal and like all of this kind of stuff. So I usually just have people kind of really focus on like, pick 2 meals a day where you're having some kind of muscle meat, and then the rest you're getting it from a different source, but then really focus on the balance. Add in, when you do cook muscle meat, try and find a way to add in bone broth or add in something with collagen in it or cook it on the bone. Things like that are really beneficial in balancing out those muscle meat meals, that also kind of boost your protein intake as well. So yeah.
Yeah, because like you said, I feel like whenever people think of protein, they just think, oh yeah, beef, chicken, turkey,
Yes.
pork, whatever. They don't like. It's common to not think of like, yeah, gelatin and then bone broth. I feel like bone broth isn't something like a common thing. People just think, oh, yeah, I'm just gonna sip on some bone broth.
Yes. Oh, I totally agree.
Yeah, no, those were some really good tips actually to like help balance it out. And like another kind of thing that I feel is quite common, especially in the whole fitness industry, is like obviously people think that they need to have over like 100 grams of protein, like because obviously 1 gram of protein per like your body weight or whatever. Do you think you can have too much protein?
Yes, I do. Like, I think that, especially in the fitness industry, I've seen like and I used to like, I am speaking to like my old self, where it's like, I used to absolutely do this too, but I still do see it today where it's like, people are eating a ton of protein, like we're talking like 200 grams of protein from muscle meat. And it's like, that is definitely a lot and can just be a lot for your body, where it's like, it is kind of, there is such a thing as too much protein. I know we kind of can think like, oh, protein is, really, it helps build muscles and it makes you stronger. So like more protein would be great. Like it doesn't necessarily, contribute to as much like fat storage or, whatever spin you want to take on it. And it's like, yes, protein is good, but I think there's kind of like a point where it's like you don't get more benefits from consuming more protein. You want to consume like an adequate amount of protein. You kind of want to find the optimal amount of protein for you, where it's like you are getting enough to maintain muscle mass. If you are working out, you want that, enough protein to help with hormone regulation and healthy hair and all of that kind of stuff. but at some point it can definitely become too much. And so I think just, finding that balance. And I think it really goes back to that idea of just variety. When you consume that variety of protein, and you don't necessarily rely on things I think I used to use like a ton of protein powder to help me reach my protein goals and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, that's not the kind of protein that I really want to be getting in my diet. And yes, it may help, some people with, muscle maintenance and like all that kind of stuff. But I know that in my diet, I can get it from other sources where it's like, I'm not just getting the protein, I'm getting the protein plus a lot of other nutrients that come with that protein. And that's really what we want to focus on, is like working on, don't just eat protein to like hit a certain amount. Eat enough whole food protein and work on that and really just prioritize that. And I think there can come a time where protein powders, various protein powders can be helpful. But I'm like, if you're not eating whole food protein and you're really relying on protein powders to get you to that point, you've missed a step, And so I always go back where it's like, that's not where I don't want you to get, focused on just hitting the only way you can hit your protein goals by using protein powders. I'm like, if that's you, just stay where you're at. If you're just getting like 70 grams of protein, like that's fine. We will continue to work on building the whole food protein without that protein powder. So yeah.
I totally agree. And let's kind of touch on some of these like fats. Obviously, we said saturated fats. What are your like recommended sources of saturated fat?
Yes. Okay. So butter is like my favorite. I absolutely love butter, and I want everyone to eat butter because it's so good. Not only does it just taste amazing, but it is really good and a great source of saturated fat. But things like butter or ghee is really, really great. Coconut oil is also a great source. And then a lot of this is going to come from kind of your animal-based foods. So things like eggs, or obviously like kind of your muscle meats. If you get like a fattier cut of meat, it's going to have more saturated fat in it. And so things like beef and chicken do have sources of saturated fat in them. Any kind, I'm definitely, like, I know this is kind of like an old traditional fat that most people don't use anymore, but like lard is also like a saturated fat source, where it's like, if you're getting lard or tallow, things like that from a good quality source, those can be really, really good. And so I think those are usually some where it's like, it takes people a little bit of time to get back to using those fats. Whereas like starting with things like butter, ghee, coconut oil, and then adding in eggs and full fat dairy as well is a great source of saturated fat. So instead of, don't get skim milk, get the full fat, get whole milk, use cream, use real cream in your coffee, like things like that, are all really, really great sources of saturated fat. Yeah, so those would be some of my favorite sources that come to mind for sure.
Awesome. Yeah, definitely agree. I guess, are we missing like any other kind of nutrition tips that we haven't covered yet? We touched on like minerals, like macronutrients. Are there any other obviously eat more food if you're under eating?
Yes. Yeah, that's kind of like a given. If you're not eating enough food, like that is definitely step one, eat enough food. And then step two would be looking at your macronutrients, making sure you're getting enough protein, enough fats, enough carbs, and getting a good balance within each of one of those. And then kind of that step three would be really looking at kind of that mineral balance aspect that we kind of touched on earlier, where don't just eat, clean foods, but really focus on what is the nutrient density of some of those foods. That's why I love adding in things like organ meats, or bee pollen is a great source of trace minerals. Things like that can be really good. Looking at those sources of kind of mineral dense foods that you can add in. So not just eating clean, but eating mineral dense, vitamin dense foods can be a great kind of next step. And from there, I think that really covers a lot of the foundations, where it's like, then you can absolutely get into like how we talked about in the beginning, where it's like, stress increases, can kind of increase, or, can cause that imbalance in estrogen to progesterone. So you can get into, how do I boost my progesterone and things like that. But it's like when you start with kind of those main three categories, where one, you're making sure you're eating enough, two, you're getting a good balance of those macronutrients, and you're really prioritizing the types that you're getting, the variety that you're getting within each of those categories. And then you're taking a look at, what do my minerals and vitamins really look like? Am I getting enough vitamins? Am I getting enough minerals through my food? That really is going to do so much to balance out a lot of those other things, where it's like, instead of just jumping in and looking at, how do I balance my estrogen and, progesterone? Again, start with those foundations first. And oftentimes when you really prioritize those, and, in addition to diet, don't forget about all the outside stressors that we did mention in the beginning, where it's like, it is like, yes, diet is a huge piece, but if you're not managing your stress well, your body is still going to be under so much stress. Do manage those outside stressors while you're targeting kind of these internal stressors. And that's really going to provide you such a good foundation that can really boost the health of your hair, where anything else that you do from there is going to be beneficial on top of that. But you're already kind of going to be naturally doing so many of the other things that I could kind of list as like, oh, this is good or this is good. It's like, well, if you're doing step 1 through 3, you're already probably getting those nutrients in.
Yeah, like you said, it's like all going back to like the basics. I feel like we overcomplicate a lot of things. I feel,
Yeah.
trying to do a lot of hard stuff rather than like just looking at, what are we eating?
Yeah.
Are we managing the stress? Are we getting sunlight? Are we,
Yes.
what kind of foods are we eating? Like, how can we improve it? I feel like obviously we kind of say it might be easy to look at the diet kind of stuff, but it can be a little bit, like, a lot to it. But once you look at the steps of like how you just like point out, make sure you're eating enough, the macros, the minerals, it kind of all kind of becomes less scary,
Yeah.
overwhelming.
Yes.
Like, I have like one kind of question I feel like people would want to know, and I feel like we've kind of alluded to it in the episode, but like, is hair loss, hair thinning, like your hair changing color, going gray, is this all something that could be reversed?
Oh, absolutely. Like, I think in most cases, like, I think there's always exceptions to the rule. But for most people who are probably like, my hair is thinning, it is, changing in texture, or this just isn't normal, my hair is graying and I'm only in my 30s, like things like that, where it's like, there's so many people, where the majority of people who are experiencing those issues, if you really take this to heart and put it into practice and stay consistent with it, where it's like, don't just do it for 30 days and be like, well, darn, it didn't work. It's like, you stick with it, because your body, like, especially when it comes to minerals and things like that, where it's like, you really have to replenish your body, and once those stores gets built up, and once your body feels that stress lowering, and it feels kind of things coming back into balance, it will then start prioritizing things like the health of your hair. And so it's definitely like a long-term, you kind of have to have that long-term goal mindset, where this isn't like 30, do this for 30 days and your hair is going to be, you're going to have like lush, long, glorious locks of hair. It's like, you really have to stick with this and really just be patient. Focus on, like, as you do this, you're going to start to see other things improving, and those things kind of like hair health are going to follow. And I mean, I've definitely seen people who, like, they've kind of had different, patches, in their hair, where it's like, it really was thin, or they felt like, yeah, this area of my hair, like, it's been so damaged, it's not really going to return to, even like growing new hair. And after several months of kind of just doing this foundational work and really almost like focusing on just other areas of your health, they started to see that hair regrowth, where it was like, oh my gosh, like, what is this? Like, my hair is actually regrowing, and like, it's even regrowing in spots I didn't even know it was thinning in, where it's like, they'll have like kind of new sprouts of hair. And so I think that it's like for most people who are seeing those beginning stages of changes in their hair, it can definitely be when you start supporting your body in the way that it needs with the nutrients that it can use, your hair will absolutely follow. So I think definitely yes. For most people, they can absolutely see an improvement in their hair.
Exactly. And for sure, like, I feel like it's not like a short-term thing. It's not going to happen in like a month, 2 months. It's
Yes.
like, I would say like 6 months to a year of like potentially seeing something. Because like obviously with the hair cycle, it takes months for that, like the first phase of the hair to like start to grow and poke through the head. It's just like, it's like a
Yes.
cycle. So we can't expect things to happen from like, oh yeah, my hair's grown back in like a month.
Yes, exactly.
Like in a safe place, so it's not like stressed. But yeah, like you say, it is possible in certain like cases, obviously.
Yeah.
Awesome. How can our listeners connect with you? Where can they find you and work?
Yeah, so most of my work I do through Instagram, so that's the best place to find me. And yeah, that is restored underscore nutrition is my name there. And then I do have my website, and that's all linked on my Instagram. So that's kind of the best place where it's like if you head to my Instagram, you can kind of find the different ways to get to my website or reach out to me or look at kind of if you want to reach out to me personally, contact me. All my email is on my website. So I would say my Instagram is the best place to kind of start with, and that'll direct you to where you need to go.
Awesome. I have everything linked in the show notes. Highly recommend following Whitney at restored underscore nutrition. Tons of like useful educational content. I'm sure you'll learn a lot. If you enjoyed this episode, you'll definitely learn and enjoy a lot of the content she shares over on her Instagram. Check out her website, and if you want to work with her, highly recommend. She like a wealth of knowledge. So thank you so much for taking the time out of the day to join me on the podcast. I enjoyed chatting with you. I learned a lot about hair health, and I'm sure our listeners have. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. It was I had such a fun time getting to talk to you, and it was a pleasure being on your show.